approximately 20% of all goods manufactured here in the United States are manufactured by companies that are owned or controlled by entities that are not based here in the United States. So the globalization is really a very important phenomenon. And as I mentioned earlier today, also A.T. Kearney again has ranked the United States as the #1 destination point for outbound direct investment. And so one of the things we will talk about here today is the role of China in this. We're going to talk about the state of Chinese investment in the United States today, and we have an extraordinary panel, a panel of providers of capital, a panel of principals who are investing, advisors, lawyers, and also advisory services in terms of how do you accomplish the investment and what are some of the pitfalls and hurdles that we need to address here in the United States as well. And I'll introduce our panelists as I call upon them to make certain remarks. Apratim Chakravavarty is the head of Offshore Asia Product Distribution of HSBC Global Markets. Many of us have been reading about the trading ratio of the RMB to the US dollar. Also, there has been some discussion about the slowing from a regulatory perspective from China of outbound investment to decrease the pressure on the RMB itself. We know now that the RMB has stabilized, whether it's temporary or more permanent, and for the first time in 5 months, as of March, the foreign reserves of China increased, so they stand today at $3.21 trillion. But Apratim, give us your overview in terms of capital outflows and how you think it impacts specifically M&A and the U.S. in particular.
Thank you. My brief today is very simple. Sitting here with my illustrious co-panelists is to talk a couple of minutes about the macro framework and then shut up and listen to the rest of the panel. Just a little bit of background. I think over the last year or so, there's been a lot of noise about the volatility in Chinese markets and their currency, and what it means for the process of capital account liberalization and RMB internationalization. For a while, there was a lot of talk in the press and the media and the markets about the fact that it will slow down the process of reform. Our view right through this entire period was that it wouldn't, and that the medium-term outlook for us was the fact that the whole process of RMB internationalization and capital account liberalization, that trend will remain intact. Now, recent events have started to bear that out. You talked about the fact that FX reserves have started pushing up, the fact that the currency is stabilized. But I think a larger, a better view of that is the fact that just look at what's going to happen in the next few months. In the next month or so, China's bond markets will finally be opened up to foreign investors. This was just announced last month. It's a huge event. China's bond markets are the second largest bond markets in the world and have been hitherto very underpenetrated by foreign investors. The fact that this market will now be accessible to foreign investors is a huge deal. In October, the RMB will finally become part of the IMF SDR basket, and you will have a number of reserve managers obviously aligning their reserves accordingly. And the third thing is obviously the fact that from an equity standpoint, MSCI had pushed out the decision about the inclusion of Chinese shares into their index till June of next year. So the process of that will start. Now, all three will have profound implications because of the amount of investment, the foreign investment that will bring into China. Now, that's from a portfolio investment perspective, and that's continued during this period. The other part of the story is the fact that obviously Chinese savings and investments have continued to be very, very high, and therefore they need to diversify their investor base. So from their perspective, there will be a lot of investments that will be coming out. Now, there's been obviously a lot of talk from the market participants about what happens to China's policy dilemma. The fact that will they let monetary policy go? Will they let the currency go? Will they slow down on capital account liberalization? And our view quite clearly is that the long-term trend is intact, and the fact that capital account liberalization is here to stay because of the factors that I mentioned. The fact that Chinese savings and investments need to diversify their base. Now, I think you are starting to see some of that, some of the figures that you talked about in terms of Chinese investments overseas bear out that story. But one thing that I will leave you with, and that sort of ties in with the currency viewpoint, is the fact that in 2011, out of all of China's ODI, only 4% was in RMB. Last year, the bulk of China's ODI was in RMB itself. So the impact of the currency and in what it does to the ability of Chinese and companies to invest overseas is actually overdone in our view because of that particular reason.
Interesting. No, thank you. Nan, you're somebody who has been investing for some time now in China itself. Your company, CDIB Capital, based in Taiwan, has been a major market player in terms of investing not only in Taiwan but also in China, with companies that are based there and also who are investing abroad. You've heard what Apratim has said. We've talked about, we've read about the slowing of the Chinese economy. What has changed sitting here today than, say, a year ago in terms of your investment approach, and where are you? What types of companies are you backing today?
Sure. So let me just share with the folks here a little bit about what I do and to share with you a couple of trends that we've seen in terms of our investment mandate. So our firm invests mainly in we are the overseas investing arm. So apart from our parent company, which is very, very active in the Taiwanese economy, what our group does is invest mostly in China and in the US. And in all of our investments, we seek a cross-border component. So for me, based here in the US, my mandate is to source deals in more US headquartered companies, however, that have a significant angle in China. Now, over time, a few of the trends that we've seen is one, whereas a few years ago, we've seen a lot more of that angle being more of a sourcing nature. Today, almost exclusively, our investment opportunities come in the form of companies that are selling into that market, and actually vice versa. To give you a couple of examples, we have invested in a food and beverage retailer, a coffee chain concept that is based in the U.S., but that has found a very, very active following in Asia. And in China, we have replaced their JV partner such that their new JV partner will very, very actively and aggressively open new stores for them over the next 2 to 3 years. At the same time, we also have a China-based company where 100% of their customers are actually U.S. customers. So the cross-border is really in both directions. Where we've seen the most activity in terms of sectors, it's been the last couple of years. It's been quite overwhelmingly in the consumer sector. There's obviously a growing appetite in the Chinese consumers to consume products and services, many of which are U.S. concepts that are resonating there. So I think that trend we've seen will continue and to grow in the future. And then just a third quick concept quick trend that I'll share with you is that we've because of our relationships in China, we've also seen a very active dialogue between Chinese strategics and ourselves in terms of potentially partnering to acquire U.S. companies. So we've seen, again, in the consumer sector where we'll work with a Chinese strategic that may be in the retail space of one particular product, but then they'll want to very aggressively expand that portfolio and and acquire U.S. companies that have different concepts, either in entertainment or in food and beverage, to kind of complement the concept that they currently have in their portfolio. Now, the types of investment that we make are in the middle market and in lower middle market. So those are somewhat isolated from more macro trends. And so for those strategics, they don't have necessarily the resources to bridge the gap between the Chinese culture of expanding businesses and the US culture. So oftentimes they'll partner with somebody like us to bridge the gap, if you will, between how they run their businesses in China and how a US middle market firm that's not today necessarily international and help them make that transition between here and there. So those are some of the trends that we've seen, and we can.
If we were having this discussion in 2011, 83% of the deals done by Chinese-based companies in the United States would have been natural resources and materials, 83%. In 2015, that percentage has shrunk to 16%. You have really a whole rotation of the type of companies in the United States that are attractive to a Chinese buyer. Financials, as you talked about, entertainment, industrials, high-tech, real estate, all figure prominently in that. There's another different rotation as well, that 56% of all deals that were done in the United States from China last year involved companies that are either private equity companies or insurance companies or other conglomerates. So you have the maturation, or the beginning of the maturation of the private equity, for example, industry in China, where financial investors will partner with strategics as well, but they will lead the acquisition itself. Before we talk more specifically about some of the companies being acquired and investments being made in the United States, I do want Dan to make some comments. He's with Bonwick Capital and managing director. He's head of China based on the West Coast. But what's interesting, I think, Dan, from your concentration is that part of the reform in China is to deal with zombie companies and also to help to better focus and streamline some of the SOEs, some of the large state-owned enterprises in China. And I know that your firm is very much in the forefront of looking for niche opportunities in that area as well.
Yeah. Well, that's great, Selig. So it's no big secret that China has become the overcapacity capital of the world, okay, among other distinctions that it has. So exporting some of that overcapacity by acquisition and bringing it into China is a natural theme. And prior to joining Bonwick, I spent a lot of time at Burnham in the asset management department, and we partnered with two large funds in Beijing, the Bohai Harvest Rosemont funds, with the China Outbound Fund, and these are multi-billion-dollar funds, and an SOE reform fund. And we went to SASIC to basically inventory what was up with the 105 largest state-owned enterprises to see what the priorities were, who wanted to be spun out, what needed to be rationalized. And that gave us a lot of investable theses to then originate deals, as we're in the investment banking business, and also help execute deals that had been pre-identified. And like Nan, we work in the mid-market to lower mid-market or small cap area of the business. I do a lot of equity capital markets work in addition to merger and acquisition work. And we saw some very, very fertile ground. And some of the themes that we heard about with Nan and that Selig was talking about are absolutely pervasive. That is, Chinese companies, especially in that size range, and you could even make the argument that larger Chinese companies, SOEs, they really need help. They need a chaperone at a minimum. They just don't have the internal expertise, despite what we hear about Ambang, Sinochem. You might even take Costco and put them in that same category where they have crackerjack in-house M&A teams. A lot of these middle market, lower middle market SOEs and even A-share listed companies don't have it. So they need to bring in people who do this for a living. And the way that has evolved into creative deal structures, and we saw this with the Bohai Harvest Rosemont funds, is special purpose vehicles get put together for transactions. And one of my colleagues, Karen Mu, is actually here today. She's working on several of these SPVs where you're bringing in, as Selig says, a financial investor, a strategic investor, the quote-unquote acquirer, which may be smaller in the equity table, and then you're actually going out and purchasing that target. And you may have, over a period of years, some type of a put option where that goes ultimately back to the Chinese acquirer. But this is not clearly just being done because of the need for capital or creative financing. It's being done to put the right teams of people in place so that you can have a successful outcome. And I think this is a trend that we're gonna continue to see. And to your comment about the zombie companies, one of the things that Premier Lee said was, we have to take out the long knives and cut these zombie companies. And one of the ways to do that, of course, is to, other than rationalizing them or phasing them out, spinning them out, shutting some of them down, is to get very active with outbound investment. So we're gonna continue to be active in that area at the middle and lower middle market slot, and look forward to any questions that the group may have afterwards.
And then, of course, it's interesting. Some surveys of Chinese investors indicate that the United States is number one, I think 46% on their list of a destination to invest in, and certainly more than 2/3 that it's in their top 10. One of the attributes that people like about the United States from a Chinese perspective is our regulatory environment, the transparency, the accountability, the reportability. On the other hand, one of the areas that they dislike the most is the regulatory side as well. So it's almost, it's an interesting two sides of the coin. But if you look what's happened in just this first few months of the year, you have Hire's $5.4 billion acquisition of the GE appliance unit. You got Dalian Wanda's $3.5 billion of legendary entertainment. On the other hand, you have deals which have been nixed by CFIUS, rejected, or with the withdrawal of the intent to buy. So, for example, Go Scale Capital's $2.8 billion acquisition of 80% of Philips Lumi LED company, was aborted. And then, of course, we have the Fairfield situation as well, where there was a topping offer from a Chinese company with a private equity group as well, where they were even going to pay for the breakup fee of $79 million, but yet Fairfield in February rejected that for fear of non-approval by CFIUS. So Steve Klemencic is with PwC Advisory. Before joining that position, he was responsible for government intelligence assessment for CFIUS. As a career officer in the military and specifically in intelligence. So what are we to make today of what CFIUS is doing, and is that a cloud on the acquisition horizon, or not even on the horizon, but currently? Where does CFIUS fit into this whole process of acquisitions?
Thanks, Selig. CFIUS, there's a lot of misunderstanding about CFIUS, what it is, what it isn't, what it can do, what it can't do. I think it's important for people to just stop and take a good, hard, objective look at the law. What the law says, it's the Foreign Investment National Security Act. What FINSA says, how it defines it, how the committee actually operates. CFIUS has a role. Their mission is to protect U.S. national security. Now, the function of the committee, it's a policymaker body, you can't get around that, but within that, a lot of the information that the policymakers make their decisions on are generated by an objective office inside there that is not a voting member of the committee. It's a member of the committee, but is not a voting member of the committee. And that's an important distinction to make. The Director of National Intelligence actually is a member of the CFIUS, but he does not have a vote in the discussion. And the whole reason behind that is so he can maintain his objectivity. That was the guy that I worked for and provided the assessments. Each CFIUS transaction will have an assessment written on it. It doesn't matter if it's from China. It doesn't matter if it's from the UK. It doesn't matter if it's from Ecuador. Every one of them is going to have an assessment written on them, and it will have the same analytic rigor will be applied to each one. Now, the way the process works, and this is where, you know, some of the deals that have fallen apart or withdrawn or people walked away from, on the part of the foreign buyer, from what I've seen, the deals that run into problems are based on the foreign buyer did not understand the process. The foreign buyer did not fully appreciate what was going to happen when he went into the CFIUS process with respect to the lens that the U.S. government's going to put on the company. And then the flip side of it is, or actually the worst part of it, I should say, is that we've also found companies who have tried to hide things from the committee during the process. And that generally results in a lot of bad blood, bad publicity for everybody. And if you understand that the committee their mission is to look at the foreign buyer, and they are going to do that. They're going to look very hard at it. The intelligence community is going to look at it, and they're going to look at, you know, okay, what are you buying? How does it, is it critical infrastructure? Is it technology? What kind of service is it? What is the connection of the target company to the U.S. government? You know, they look at data. They look at proximity is always an issue. Things that, if you actually stop and look, the foreign acquirer could make the same determination if he stopped. Now, if he doesn't understand it, then it's incumbent upon him to find out the answer. Fairchild walked away from this because they saw a problem. They knew that they did something, and I had nothing to do with these deals. They had something that was going to be so problematic that the CFIUS was not going to clear the transaction. And they knew that, which is my guess is why they walked away, is because it wasn't going to happen. Whatever concern the CFIUS had would be to the point that it could not be mitigated. The CFIUS will work very hard to mitigate the threats so they can clear the transactions. The vast majority of transactions clear the CFIUS. By far, the vast majority clear the CFIUS. Okay, there's a lot of hoopla about Chinese firms that don't get through the CFIUS process. You should look at the number that do get through the CFIUS process. Vastly outnumbers the handful that do not. Okay, now it's important to understand in the process you've got your 30-day look, you have a 45-day second stage investigation, and then you have a 15-day period that the White House can make a ruling if it needs to. The only person who can say no in the entire process is the president. The CFIUS does not say no. The CFIUS only says yes. Or they say, I can't make a decision. These are the concerns. My concerns are too great for me to clear the transaction. And it will eventually, because there's the working group at 30 days. The second stage, the 45-day investigation stage, the group of people that make that decision are the deputy secretaries of the departments. So you have the Deputy Secretary of Defense, the Deputy Secretary of the Treasury. These are the number 2 guys in the departments. These are serious, serious players. Okay? And if they can't clear the transaction, at that point it goes to the White House and they state their concerns and the president makes his decision. In the history of the CFIUS, he has said no once. Okay? Now, to say that the committee says no, the committee will express the concerns so the company's aware of them. Okay? So none of this is a secret to the company. It doesn't just drop out of the blue that, oh, they said no. Well, I never saw that coming. That's not true. Okay? There is a communication between Treasury and the company, treasurers and parties of the transaction. But it's important to understand the buyer has to recognize what is in the process. Okay? So I wrote threat assessments on companies that would come through. What gets looked at? Okay, well, what are your ties to the foreign government? And it can be, again, Chinese, Israeli, French, German, English, Brazilian, whatever. Okay, do you have a history of corruption? If you have U.S. export control technology, do you play by our rules? Okay, because that's part of the deal. In order to get licensed, is you have to abide by U.S. export law. Well, do you? Do you protect U.S. technology like you say you will? Okay, then you look at what's being bought, and we talked about this, the high technology, the critical infrastructure, pick the topic. That's listed in FINSA, by the way. it's just the lack of knowledge is what's so frustrating to me, that the people just, the misconceptions and the people that don't get the deal through, there's a reason that the deal doesn't go through, okay? The companies are not ill-informed like some of them will say they are. The surprises are, they're not, okay? The surprises, if there's a surprise in the transaction the government comes up with, it's because the buyer or the seller was not forthcoming in the filing. So there's a responsibility in here on the part of the buyer, on the part of the seller, to make sure that they are as forthcoming and transparent as they can be. Because when you are not, and this I have seen, companies that are not transparent with the committee will dig in its heels. And you will attract more attention by not being transparent than you will if you are transparent.
It's interesting because CFIUS really is focused on national security. But then again, what is national security is always an issue. I think the U.S. tends to define it far more narrowly than, for example, China does in terms of its definitional structure. In the Smithfield acquisition, and Alex will speak to that, food safety was not viewed as a national security issue, although there were some congressmen, others, industry associations that wanted to do that. It was curious. Ambang, as we all know, withdrew its offer for Starwood, and the deal went to Marriott. But there was some discussion that if it would have gone forward, how would CFIUS have reacted to the large amount of data that Starwood has on individuals, government employees, and others who stay at Starwood facilities. And I think maybe there is specific sensitivity to this because of the breach of from the Office of Personnel Management in the government, where extensive files of millions of government employees or applicants, that data was hacked. But Alex, as one of the leading practitioners, you and your law firm, Alex being the resident partner of Jun He here in the United States and helpful to all of us in working with Chinese companies as they acquire and invest in the United States, what are you hearing from your clients in terms of their concern with CFIUS? And I'm curious if you have any thoughts on the issue of, if would Ambang, in your view, have encountered some issue, given it had the acquisition gone forward with Starwood?
Sure. Thanks, Selig. Before I forget it, I just want to mention that I'm also one of the trustees of China Institute, which is a nonprofit organization. Tomorrow we're going to have a Lazard senior banker, Gary Parr, talking about his personal experience representing Starwood in interacting with Ambang tomorrow noon at China Institute in downtown. So if any of you guys are interested, just send me an email. I'll try to sign you up. But briefly on CFIUS, I think there is a China premium that's being paid. Because a lot of U.S. targets are concerned about the ability of many of our Chinese clients, honestly, to implement these deals because of the review process or the potential risks coming out of the review process. So I think a lot of target companies are charging Chinese companies fairly or unfairly more than what they would to a U.S. bidder. Personally, I think there is a lot of things that can be done on the U.S. side, on the Chinese side. I mean, it's a black box. I think a lot of things can be improved as far as how the law is being implemented. But I think the Chinese companies can also do better by communicating early on, with the U.S. government authorities. There's a lot of things can be done there. But one thing I want to mention is, where we are in terms of Chinese outbound investments. There has been some concern about, since Ambang retreated from that transaction, there's been some concern about, especially given the newly imposed restrictions on taking money out of China. A lot of people have been concerned about, whether this China investments, this trend into the United States, whether this is going to continue. I'll tell you, my experience has been, I was in China 2 weeks ago talking to dozens of Chinese companies about investing overseas in the United States. I mean, there was tremendous interest. So I think we need to look at some fundamentals. Very quickly, I think 3 things stand out in terms of the fundamental reasons for Chinese companies to invest overseas. One is the tremendous overcapacity that the economy has domestically. I read it somewhere that the excess Chinese steel production capacity, and this is the capacity that China doesn't need, in addition to whatever is needed in terms of steel capacity production in China. The excess capacity is more than the combined total capacities of the countries of United States, Russia, Germany, and Japan.
Yep.
So something has to be done to that overcapacity. And the second thing is, the urbanization in China, the aging population, the growing middle class. People are living longer. People have more money. They're in need of better consumer products. They're in need of better food. They're in need of better brands of this and that. Medical devices, healthcare. We're seeing a lot of investments from a lot of our clients into these areas in the U.S. I think that's going to continue. And also the government policy, this year is the first year in the 13th five-year plan, which has made it a strategic focus for the government to encourage Chinese companies to continue to invest overseas. And this is a five-year plan. We're in year one. So I think all these fundamental things are going to continue. Let me just quickly share with you 2 or 3 quick examples of what has changed recently in Chinese outbound investments. We have represented a heavy machinery manufacturer in China, one of the largest, producing the excavators, all these kind of heavy equipment. They've been exporting to the U.S. for a very long time. And now what they're trying to do is to make more direct investments in here, setting up a joint venture with the local partner. What they're trying to do is to increase the service component. Because the market leader in this industry, heavy machinery, is Caterpillar in the United States. And their service component of their whole revenues is about a third. It's generated from services, in addition to selling the stuff. And for the Chinese company, this is a tiny component. So I think that's a trend to be looking at.
And I think also Chinese companies have learned the benefit of localizing and how you integrate yourself better. For example, 20% of Fosun's 100,000 employees are non-Chinese. Or with Sandpower, 70% of their senior executives have either studied or lived abroad. And you see with Nextier and successful examples of Chinese acquisition here in the United States, how really the expertise of the human capital has been harnessed and how jobs have been added to, not just the technology exported and facilities shuttered. It wasn't a U.S. deal, but when Chem China last year bought for $7.7 billion Pirelli, the tire manufacturers, they had the management team there lead and execute the 100-day post-merger integration scheme. So I think there is a sense now of the need to work with and maximize the benefit of local expertise and talent if you're really going to maximize the opportunity in place. I want to turn to you, Brian, first, and then to Lawrence. Brian is with China Merchant Bank, which really has distinguished itself as the leading bank in China, dealing with entrepreneurs and with SMEs in China itself. He is the executive director of M&A, very much involved working with Chinese companies in their acquisition program in the United States. Brian, what are you seeing? What are some of the themes? What are some of the situations that you can perhaps share with us that you are working on?
Thank you, Selig. I think on this part, China Merchants Bank very distinguished from other, banks in China because given our, chain, our route, we're not really a bank owned by a government agency. All the other top 5 banks, ahead of us is owned by CSEC. Given this route, we are very distinguished, and then we lend to mostly, not infrastructure, not energy, not mining. Our clientele base is pretty much healthcare, and then TMP, consumer. Our clients are basically Alibaba, Tencent, Baidu, etc., and Fosun. So that is why, we decided to set up this business in New York, helping our clients to sourcing deals and also helping them with execution. I fully concur with Dan just now. I think they need a lot of good amount of hand-holding in terms of how to present their interest and how to do the bidding process here in the U.S. We also provide financing. Through this process, we have the opportunity of really seeing some of the recent demand for Chinese companies investing in the U.S. So I think if you look at the deals that has been announced and done in the U.S., interestingly, a lot of them, most of them is done by private companies. You are talking about Anbang, Fosun, H&A, and then Lenovo, you name it, and then Haier as well. So a lot of these, buyers is really, they have a desperate need. I think Alex mentioned some of them, but I think, we see the theme is really in a couple of sectors, where the interest is very strong. Number one, the healthcare. This is really driven by a 1.3 aging population. Developing drugs in China getting increasingly difficult. And then there's about 50, 60 very large pharma companies interested in bringing the drug overseas to China. And then an extreme case recently, was a Chinese investment bank called Dongfang Gaosheng. They actually raised 3 billion RMB in Chinese NASDAQ. The purpose of that fundraising was to go acquire public, healthcare company in the U.S. and then, bring them back to China. So this is really demand-driven. We also see the similar thing in, consumer as well, dairy products, and then even the brands, retail. It's very heavily driven by, and even media. Like the reason Wanda is looking into the studio deal is really they can actually help the business to really grow in China. They already own a lot of the cinemas in China, and then the young people in China, they spend their time, their money, to watch movies, in the holidays. The other sector is really technology. I think this is an area we see Chinese companies are really, spending their money trying to buy, know-how and technology. They have been, making simple manufacturing for about a decade. Now they realize, to move to the next grade, they need to actually, acquire companies with good technology. So this leads to the next question, basically, ahead of, this increasing Chinese demand, how do we, smartly access the Chinese buyers? The Chinese buyers, there's a lot of them from PE, public company, SOE, non-SOE individual. So I think the answer is really to understand, why they are actually coming here to do this acquisition. And then I think we can be a help on this process where, I think our objective here is not really to set up a team to do any local M&A advisory, but we want to be the bridge, working with advisors in this market, working with lawyers, etc., and helping, some of the middle market deal flows to come to the Chinese buyers, and then we can help on screen, some of the Chinese buyers coming to this market. So we are very happy to talk to people about the specific needs of our clients. And then I think, the critical thing is actually to work with the right buyer, and then to work with, people who know these buyers. And the financing, obviously, is very important as well. So we recently have been able to help with Chinese companies to, get away, from some of these, capital restrictions by providing with them a kind of a bridge loan, which help them to close the deal and then take some time to go through the regulatory approval process.
No, perfect.
So,
Thank you so much for those observations. And I wanted to end our discussion with Lawrence, because Lawrence, in fact, when you talk about servicing your client, Lawrence has a fund that he's established. He has made a number of acquisitions here in the United States. What are you finding in terms of the environment here? There was some discussion earlier from Alex about the China premium of Chinese companies overpaying perhaps for companies as well. What are you finding in terms of the opportunities that you are seeing, Lawrence, and how receptive are the companies that you are talking with in terms of dealing with you when you're in a competitive situation, when there are domestic companies as well vying for the same asset as you are?
Thank you, Selig. And I would like to share with you my experience for recently 3 years. And my company called Yuanming Capital. We are the cross-border private equity firm. And for last 5-6 years, myself with my partner and did almost 10 deals between China and the U.S. And the largest deal is a Mavion deal, which is a medical device company and located in Boston. And they produce the advanced proton equipment in the United States. And we are leading investor, and invest this company $200 million and become the largest shareholder. And just because of that, and I become the board member and also the chairman for the China operation. So from my point of view, and I'm so positive and just like the Alex said, and I spent almost more than half years in China and less than half years in the United States. And for the last 3 months, and I traveled to China, to Shanghai, Beijing, Guangzhou, Shenzhen, and met a lot of the people. And I found that, and every company, and especially for the listing company, they're looking for the investor outside. So, and do they have money? Yes. Do they want to invest in the United States? Yes. Can they do? May not. The reason is that for most of the companies don't have the expertise to help them. So they have the needs, they have money, and they want to deal here. So I can see clearly that, and the big trend is still there. And I think for next 5 years, 10 years, and you can see maybe $500 billion, invest in the United States. So, and I'm so glad that and one thing is that I should mention, and for last half century in the United States, only one country is Japan. They are invest in the United States and spare this country. So compared with Japanese, and this Japanese only has maybe more than dozen company invest in the United States, because in United States, in Japan, there are conglomerate there, such as Mitsubishi and Toyota and the other company. So for those deals, you may not have the chance to reach it. And this is a deal for Morgan Stanley, for Goldman, not for you guys. But this time, when Chinese investors come to this country, so you can see thousands of companies, they are looking for a deal here. Most of the companies, they're not the SOE, they're not the conglomerate, but they are a listed company. At least they do 1 or 2 deals, maybe more. So I think this is a great opportunity for the middle market, player like you guys. So I can see that from my point of view, and I deal with some listed company, and they almost want to buy everything. The good thing is that for 10 years ago, and the major investor is come from the ICOE, and they buy the oil, they buy the big company, they buy some high-tech company, maybe. So, but recently, and the good thing is that most of the companies they're not ICOE. Probably 90, I shouldn't say
84%. 84% last year.
Yes, 84%. Yeah,
we're private.
Yes, you know me. What I know. So I think this is a great opportunity for all of you, and we can work together to help those private company, private entrepreneur to fund the deal. Why they come to the United States to buy assets or invest here? We are not Japanese. Japan is a small country. They don't have the internal market. China has the biggest internal market right now. So for next 10 years, for example, in the healthcare area, the market size will increase from 2 trillion up to 8 trillion. The age time will come. So more Chinese company more Chinese would like to get the more, hospital and the good customer care and the good customer goods. So we really want to help those companies to come to the United States to invest in some company as a minority shareholder or majority shareholder. So we work together to share the 2 markets. I think this is my thinking. So everybody has an opportunity.
I'm really grateful for all the perspectives that our panelists have shared here today. I think all of us here, and I think the audience, are excited by the opportunity. And as Lawrence has indicated, one reads about the large deals, but essentially 55, 60% of all the deals that are done globally by China-based companies are in the middle market, under $100 million. So at the end of the day, I think there's enormous opportunities, for all of us to be participating together in this extraordinary phenomenon and bridging the best that the U.S. and China has to offer, and really creating enormous synergies between the two countries. My thanks to our panel, and my thanks to you, the audience, as well. Thank you.